You ever hear someone scream across a perfectly still lake at 7 a.m.? No? Well, let me tell you, it'll make your coffee taste like panic. I was standing on my porch, mug in hand, watching mist curl off the water, when Cheryl's voice, high-pitched and full of HOA rage, came tearing through the air like a war horn. "Move that eyesore off the water, Samuel." That eyesore was my fishing boat, tied up to my dock on my shoreline, floating in a lake I own. Yeah, that's the part she didn't know. And what started as just another petty HOA tantrum turned into one of the biggest neighborhood scandals our county's ever seen. Fraud, forgery, fake maps, secret accounts, arrests. And me, I was just the guy with the boat. Stick around, because by the time this story's over, someone's going to jail, a community's going to rise up, and a map, well, let's just say they tried to erase me from it. It started with a scream, not a life or death kind of scream. No, this was the scream of pure, HOA field entitlement. "Move that eyesore off the water, Samuel." I blinked, still standing on my porch in my slippers, coffee steaming in my hand, staring out across the lake. It was quiet, peaceful, mist rising like breath off the surface, except now it wasn't. There she stood, Cheryl, in a blinding white tracksuit, one hand on her hip, the other pointing at my fishing boat like it had personally offended her ancestors. "It's against HOA guidelines," she barked. "Section 7, Article 4, no personal watercraft on community access areas." I just sipped my coffee. "Morning, Cheryl," I called back. "You want to try that again? Maybe with less yelling and a little more basic human decency?" She was already marching up my gravel driveway like she owned the dust under her orthopedic sandals. No invitation, no hesitation, just rage on wheels, or in this case, rage on foot. "This isn't about manners, Samuel Ellison," she snapped. "Your rust bucket violates HOA policy. You've got 72 hours to move it or face daily fines." That's when I smiled. See, Cheryl thought she was delivering an official order. She didn't realize she'd just declared war. Because here's what she didn't know. That eyesore, that modest little aluminum boat tied to that dock, it wasn't sitting on community property. It wasn't even on public access land. It was on my lake. That's right, I owned the lake. Not just a slice, not just the shore, the entire lake. Bought it outright 20 years ago from a farmer who retired to Florida. And ever since then, I'd let the HOA believe whatever they wanted. They never checked the records, never asked. They just assumed, and I let them. Until now. Ever been in a situation where someone tried to control something that was never theirs to begin with? Drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. Because this story, it's about what happens when you finally say enough. Next morning, I went into the house, pulled out the old manila folder from my safe. Original deed, water rights, surveyor's map, with my name printed big and bold right across the shoreline. And that was the moment I decided. No more letting it slide. Cheryl and her clipboard battalion had made their move. Now it was my turn. Most folks don't keep land deeds in their safe, but I've always believed if something's worth owning, it's worth protecting. So when Cheryl came at me with her HOA rulebook and threats of $100 0 cents a day fines, I knew it was time. I opened the safe, pulled out the old manila folder, and sat at my kitchen table like I was about to deal poker at the World Series. There it was. The deed. The surveyor's map, the original water rights documents, all signed, stamped, notarized, all proving one thing. That lake, every ripple of it, belonged to me. The best part? There was even a zoning note from 32 years ago stating that when the neighborhood was developed, the lake was never annexed into common property. It stayed private. I had let it slide for nearly 2 decades. Let the fishing club come and go. Let kids paddle around. Let neighbors assume it was ours, because honestly, it didn't bother me. But then came Cheryl, with her threats, her attitude, her total lack of curiosity, and suddenly I was real interested in boundaries again. The next morning I drove 2 stakes into the ground at the lake's main access path and hung a bright white sign between them. Permit property. No access without permission. Trespassers will be reported. Let's just say it got attention. By lunchtime, I spotted Cheryl standing by the entrance in her golf cart, squinting at the sign like it had personally insulted her family tree. She came back a few hours later. This time she brought backup. "This is Greg," she said, arms crossed like she was introducing a lawyer on live TV. "He's the HOA vice president." Greg looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Samuel," he said, shaking my hand with all the enthusiasm of a wet sock, "we'd like to de-escalate this. The fishing club has been using the lake for over 15 years. Without permission," I replied. "What we assumed, you assumed wrong, and then I laid it out, calm, clear, and with no wiggle room. You tried to fine me for docking my boat on my lake, so I'm revoking access, effective immediately." Cheryl's face went from pink to pale to purple in under 10 seconds. "You can't do that," she barked. "This is war, Samuel." "Careful," I said. "Threats make things legal real fast. And I've got every piece of paperwork you'll ever need, framed and ready." They left in a cloud of entitlement and cheap perfume. Greg muttered something about checking with the board. I watched them go, then walked back to the house and poured myself another cup of coffee. Because this wasn't over. This was just the opening shot. Ever had someone try to enforce rules on something they don't even own? Tell me in the comments. I know I'm not alone in this. Hit like if you've ever had to pull out receipts and shut the nonsense down. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next, let's just say Cheryl and her clipboard army didn't take the L quietly. You'd think the sign would be enough. Bright white. Bold red letters. Crystal clear message. Private property. Keep out. But no, apparently Cheryl reads signs the same way she reads bylaws, only when they benefit her. The next morning I was enjoying a second cup of coffee, porch seat, lake view, calm breeze, when I noticed a handful of guys in orange vests by the south end of the lake. They weren't fishing, were pounding in stakes. Unrolling what looked like temporary fencing, I grabbed my phone, tucked it in my shirt pocket with the camera rolling and strolled down. "Morning, fellas," I called out, all casual. "What's going on here?" One of them turned, mid-swing with a mallet, and gave me that oh no look people get when they realize they're on the wrong side of something. "We're just setting up a restoration barrier," he said. "HOA said shoreline work was scheduled for this week." I raised an eyebrow. "On this side of the lake?" He nodded. "Yeah, up to the bend." "Huh?" I said. "That's interesting, since this entire shoreline is mine. Who exactly gave you permission?" Cheryl, HOA president." He pointed vaguely toward the road. I held up a hand. "I'm gonna need you to stop right now. This is private land. You are trespassing, and if you touch one more blade of grass, I'll be calling the sheriff." The guy looked between me and the stakes already in the ground like he was doing mental math. "Look," he muttered, "we're just following orders." "I get it," I said, "but the people giving you those orders are wrong. You can either leave peacefully or explain this to law enforcement with me and a folder full of property deeds." Credit to them, they didn't argue. 20 minutes later, they were loading up their stakes and fencing back into the truck. I stood there the whole time, arms crossed, just in case Cheryl decided to appear and start narrating like a true crime docuseries. And sure enough, there she was. Across the street, standing by her golf cart, arms folded, watching. I didn't wave, didn't smile, just turned and walked back to my dock. That afternoon, I filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's department. Unauthorized construction, attempted land encroachment, trespassing. They took it seriously, not because HOA presidents rarely overstep, but because I had receipts. Stamped, notarized, surveyor-certified receipts. The next morning, 2 deputies knocked on Cheryl's door. I watched from my porch like I was front row at a courtroom drama. Cheryl's arms were flailing like she was conducting an angry orchestra. Greg was there too, HOA's very own vice president of regret, staring at his shoes like they might teleport him to another dimension. No shouting from her this time, no stomping up my drive, but a few hours later I got an email from someone I didn't expect, Rachel. HOA treasurer. Technically, she wanted to meet. Ever felt the tide turn in your favor for once? That slow, satisfying shift where silence means they're worried? Like, comment, or subscribe if you've ever had to fight your corner with facts, not fury. Because next, Rachel tells me what's really been going on behind those HOA emails. And let me tell you, Cheryl wasn't just after my lake. She had bigger plans, and a whole lot to hide. Rachel wasn't someone I knew well. We'd waved a few times in passing, mailboxes, bake sales, HOA potlucks back before they got weird. So when I got her email, subject line, "We need to talk off the record," I was intrigued and slightly suspicious. We met at the local diner that evening, neutral ground. 2 cups of coffee, a basket of fries between us, and a folder she slid across the table like it was contraband. "I'm the HOA treasurer," she said, voice low. "Well, was..." Cheryl slowly pushed me out over the last few months. I nodded. I'd seen that move before. Tighten the circle, cut off accountability, stack the board with yes people. She changed the login credentials to the budget software. Won't share purchase orders. Keeps telling me things are handled. "What made you reach out?" I asked. Rachel tapped the folder. This. A $3,500.00 line item labeled Aquatic Resource Enhancement. When I asked what it was, she said it was for the fishing club. Then she shut the meeting down early. I raised an eyebrow. "You know that club's been using my lake without permission," she exhaled. "I do now." Rachel leaned in slightly. "Look, I'm not a pushover, but Cheryl? She weaponizes the bylaws, she bullies people quiet, and she's hiding something. I know it." I opened the folder, dozens of printed pages. Vendor payments, check logs, line items with vague descriptions, lake works, shoreline solutions, weekend supply rentals. Most had no matching invoices. Some were signed off by someone named Kyle B. "Didn't ring a bell? You know this guy?" I asked. "No, but I ran the address from one of the checks. It's not a business. It's a 2-bedroom apartment 2 towns over." I sat back in the booth, staring at the folder. This wasn't just shady. It smelled like fraud with a side of fraud sauce. "You want to blow the whistle, don't you?" "I do," she said. "But if I go at her alone, she'll bury me in procedural garbage. And honestly, I can't afford to lose my job over this." I nodded slowly. "Then let's not go at her alone." And just like that, we were a team. She brought the finance firepower, I brought the paperwork, and a whole lot of patience that had finally run out. We gave it 72 hours. In that time, I pulled together a timeline of events, photos of the fencing crew on my land, copies of the original deed and water rights. Rachel assembled a spreadsheet that could make a forensic accountant cry. Budgeted V's actual V's vanished, and then we printed letters, not emails. Letter, real paper, folded, delivered, by hand, to every single household in the neighborhood. Each envelope contained a summary of what happened at the lake, a list of HOA expenses flagged by Rachel, and a request to attend an emergency open meeting at the community center that Saturday. The response? Let's just say people showed up. Over 60 residents. Standing room only. Some folks I hadn't seen in years, some who'd never cared about HOA politics a day in their lives. But now they cared. Have you ever teamed up with someone you didn't expect just to do the right thing? Hit that like button if you know that feeling. Drop a comment if you've ever blown the whistle or wished someone else would. And don't forget to subscribe, because things are about to get real loud, real fast. Because next, we step in front of the whole neighborhood and start reading receipts out loud. I've never been a public speaker. Give me a lake, a fishing rod, and peace. I'll take that over a podium any day. But when Saturday rolled around and over 60 neighbors packed the community center, I knew one thing. Silence wasn't an option anymore. They filled every chair. Some stood along the back wall. A few leaned against the windows, arms crossed, not angry, but alert. They were ready to hear the truth. Rachel stepped up first. No microphone. No drama, just a calm, steady voice and a folder full of financial firepower. Over the last 2 years, she began, the HOA has spent nearly $40,000, 0 cents on items that were either misrepresented, unapproved, or have no traceable record. That includes checks made to vendors with no business licenses, inflated event costs, and money labeled as lake maintenance for a lake we do not own. The room murmured. A couple heads turned toward Cheryl, sitting in the front row with her lips pressed tighter than a locked safe. Rachel opened the spreadsheet on the projector. Vendor names, amounts, dates, no invoices, no board approvals. Then I stepped up, told the story. This started because I tied a boat to my own dock on a lake I legally own. Cheryl threatened me with fines. She sent a crew to build fencing on land I paid for, and she tried to use HOA rules to control something that's never belonged to her or the board. I held up a laminated copy of the original deed. This document has been on file with the county for 2 decades, and not once did anyone on this board ever check it. The room went dead silent. Then, from the back, a voice rose. An older man in a flannel jacket. "So, where's the money now?" Rachel looked him square in the eye. "We don't know, but we're going to find out." That's when Cheryl stood up, sharp-voiced, shaky hands. "This is a personal attack. These two are trying to undermine the HOA because they don't like how things are run." But it was too late. People were already standing. Questions started flying. Why weren't permits filed for that shoreline work? Why did we spend HOA funds on paddle boats? Why were invoices locked away from the treasurer? Cheryl tried to talk over them, but it was like yelling into a thunderstorm. The momentum had shifted. By the end of the meeting, a motion was made to suspend Cheryl pending an audit. It passed. Greg, the HOA vice president, resigned quietly halfway through the vote. A temporary committee was formed on the spot. Rachel was appointed acting chair. It was the first time in years that something real had happened in one of those meetings. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The following week, the HOA's bank records were subpoenaed, and that's when the lid really blew off. Turns out, that mysterious Kyle B. who kept popping up on checks, he was Cheryl's nephew, and he'd been paid over $18,000 0 cents for consulting work that never happened. The sheriff's office opened an investigation. Have you ever seen the truth hit like a wave, sweeping through a room, crashing down walls of lies? Like this video if you've ever watched the powerful scramble when the receipts come out. Comment if you've been part of a turning point, big or small. And don't forget to subscribe, because justice was just getting started. The neighborhood was still buzzing after the meeting. Cheryl was suspended. Greg was gone. Rachel was in charge, and a forensic accountant was digging through years of HOA spending like a dog sniffing out buried bones. For a minute, I thought that was it. Justice had finally caught up. Then one morning, cold, still, sky hanging low with that weird quiet that only shows up before snow, I found a note, folded under my windshield wiper. Typed, no name, no return address. "You may have stopped Cheryl, but not everyone on that board was innocent. You should look into the old equipment shed behind the tennis courts." I hadn't thought about that shed in years. It sat half buried in overgrowth, back behind the cracked tennis courts no one used anymore. Most people thought it was just for old paint and folding chairs. Later that afternoon, I drove to the back lot of the community center. Walked through the leaves and spiderwebs until I saw it. Still standing, barely. Rust at the hinges, padlock dangling but not locked. I slipped it off and pulled the door open. The smell hit first. Dust, mold, neglect. Then the light from a broken vent spilled across the contents inside. Rusted mower pile of rotting flyers, stack of pool no diving signs from a summer long gone. And then I saw them. 3 plastic bins, pushed behind a false panel, labeled in faded marker. Event supplies. I opened the first one. Envelopes, dozens, bundled in rubber bands, all unopened. HOA dues checks, some dated back 3 years, names I recognized, retirees, new families, folks who always paid early and never asked questions. Second bin, bank slips, deposit stubs, but the account numbers didn't match any HOA documentation. I took out my phone and started snapping pictures. The third bin stopped me cold. 2 black notebooks, worn, stuffed with handwritten notes, not official logs, diaries, running commentary, messy cursive, page after page of backroom deals, name drops, and code words. Greg agreed to the transfer plan. Elaine, still nervous, told her no paper trail. Kyle handled the routing. 1 page. Goal, phase out Ellison's claim quietly. Submit alternate map to zoning office. File through clerical contact. Timeline, 3. 5 weeks pushback, max. My name, my land, my lake. They hadn't just wanted to use the water. They were trying to erase me entirely. I loaded the bins into the back of my truck, drove straight to the county DA's office. Langford met me in the parking lot. He opened one of the notebooks, read a few lines, and looked up. This changes things. A week later, new subpoenas went out. 2 more board members, Elaine and a man named Harris, were arrested. Charges now included obstruction, mail fraud, conspiracy, forgery. But that wasn't the biggest shock. No, that came when the Financial Crimes Unit traced the deposit slips. Turns out a second account had been opened years ago under the HOA's name, but it wasn't tied to the organization's tax ID. It was created using fake documents and forged credentials. The total? $118,000, 0 cents, siphoned over 4 years. Vacations, renovations, even private school tuition for Cheryl's niece. It was all there, in the trail, signed, sealed, and now seized. The judge approved full asset forfeiture. Cheryl's house, her SUV, her family's lake house in Michigan, gone, liquidated. The money was placed into a restitution pool for the neighborhood. And the HOA, well, Rachel had been thinking about that too. Ever uncover something so much bigger than you expected just because you followed a hunch? Like this video, if you believe truth has a way of surfacing. Drop a comment if you've ever seen the system finally work. And hey, subscribe. Because in the next chapter, something unexpected happens. Rachel brings me a binder and says 6 words I never thought I'd hear. We're dissolving the HOA for good. I never imagined I'd end up on a witness stand because of a fishing boat. But here we were. State versus Cheryl Whitmore, plus 2 former HOA board members, on trial for fraud, forgery, embezzlement, obstruction, and mail fraud. The courthouse was packed. Neighbors filled the gallery, whispering like kids at a school assembly. Some still shocked, some angry, some just curious. I wore the same boots I'd had on the morning Cheryl screamed at me from across the lake. Felt appropriate. Langford, the DA's lead investigator, called me up as the opening witness. I walked up, raised my hand, swore in. "Mr. Ellison," Langford said, "can you walk the court through how this all began?" "With a boat," I said simply, "tied to my dock, on a lake I own." That got a few smiles. Then I laid it out, clean and direct, the history of the land, the original deed, the fencing crew, the forged annexation map, the fishing club, the lake that never belonged to the HOA. Langford asked about the documents I'd provided. Every page is time-stamped, notarized, certified, and backed by county records. He nodded. Then came the defense attorney, young, overconfident, a little too much hair gel for a guy asking about ethics. "Mr. Ellison, would you say you harbor personal animosity toward my client?" "Not until she tried to erase me from my own land." "Isn't it possible," he pushed, "that you misunderstood the HOA's intentions regarding the lake? I read the forged annexation map myself. My name was gone, my lot labeled undeveloped green space. You don't misunderstand that. Why didn't you stop the HOA from using the lake sooner?" "Because I didn't care until they tried to fine me for using it myself." He hesitated. I didn't. He sat down. The rest of the trial unfolded fast. Emails, screenshots, bank records, photos of Cheryl walking into the bank that opened the second, fraudulent HOA account. Testimonies from Rachel, from the workers who were told to build fences on my land. Even a digital forensic analyst confirmed the payment trails and IP addresses used to fabricate login histories. Cheryl never took the stand, guilty on all counts. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in state prison with possible parole after 5. Greg and Elaine, probation, and a lifetime ban from ever serving on an HOA board again. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside, people patted me on the back. Some shook my hand. One guy handed me a homemade jar of pickles. "For the man who saved the lake," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I just said thanks. Later that week, Rachel showed up at my dock with a binder. She looked tired, but lighter. "We're doing it," she said. "We're dissolving the HOA." I blinked. "You can actually do that?" "Takes a supermajority vote, county approval, and a whole lot of paperwork, but yes, we can." "What happens to everything? The walking trails, the community center?" "We're creating a neighborhood trust. No enforcement power, just maintenance. Voluntary contributions." For the first time in a long time, I exhaled. "That sounds peaceful?" Ever stood up to something you thought couldn't be changed, only to find out it could? Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe communities work best when they're built on truth, not fear. Because next, we lay the HOA to rest. And in its place, we rebuild something better. Summer came slow that year. After the trial, after the vote, after the ink dried on the papers dissolving the HOA, the neighborhood didn't erupt into celebration. It exhaled. No more fines. No more surprise suspections from board members with clipboards and power trips. The lake was still. Not in mourning, not in retreat, just still. Like it had been waiting for all of this to pass. People waved more. Conversations that used to end in awkward silence now lingered longer. A group of teenagers, once told to stay away from the water, held a cleanup day. They filled 4 contractor bags with old fishing line and soda cans. Someone hung a handmade sign near the trailhead. Respect what's real. I started getting invited to things. Barbecues, birthdays, even a trivia night at the community center. I didn't go to all of them, but the invitations mattered. One afternoon I was tightening ropes on the dock when Harold, an old-timer who'd lived here since the first foundation was poured, walked up with 2 cups of cider. "You know," he said, "I always figured that lake was just for the view." "It's more than a view," I replied. "It's a boundary, and it's a mirror," he nodded slowly. "Ain't that the truth?" We raised our cups and toasted, not to victory, but to clarity. That night I sat on the end of the dock, feet dangling above water that glowed gold in the setting sun, and I thought about everything we'd nearly lost, not just land, not just money, but the simple truth of who we are when no one's watching, and what we become when someone tries to take that away. Power doesn't always come with loud voices. Sometimes it arrives quiet, through ink on paper, deeds in drawers, and people who don't back down. Rachel's Neighborhood Trust was officially approved 2 weeks later. We drafted a charter. I declined a seat on the board. "You sure?" she asked. "I've got what I need right here," I said, nodding to the water. The final meeting of the HOA, now just a formality, was held in the old community center. Rachel stood at the front, binder in hand, and read a statement I hadn't heard before. "Let this serve as a reminder," she said, "that power is not a license to control, and no title, no office, no clipboard gives you the right to rewrite the truth." The room stayed quiet, not out of fear, out of respect. People filed out slowly, like leaving church after the kind of sermon that lingers. Later that evening, as twilight fell over the lake, I found myself back on the dock. Same boots, same coffee mug, same peace. Only now, it wasn't just mine. It belonged to a community that had almost forgotten how to protect itself, until it remembered. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you believe that truth matters, especially when it's quiet, leave a comment, share your story, and subscribe for more. Because in the end, you can take the signs, you can take the seat on the board, you can even try to take the shoreline. But what you can't take is the light that comes back when people finally see things clearly. And this lake, it still reflects everything.